In an age of technological innovations, with profound advancements in medicine and science, never before has there been a time like this, where vast amounts of information is readily available at our fingertips. But in this age of technological breakthroughs, old dogmas die hard. And the most basic element of life itself has been neglected: water. Without it, life on Earth would cease to exist. In this report, we take an in-depth look at the deliberate addition of chemical compounds to the nation's water supply, a practice known as water fluoridation, endorsed by the government, that has been in use in the United States for 70 years, despite numerous studies revealing potentially hazardous health implications. What is fluoride? Is it safe to drink? Is it safe for our children? Should we be adding fluoride to our water supply? What about fluoridated toothpaste? In this report, we speak with two men from the Fluoride Action Network who are taking water fluoridation and the government head on with science on their side, as they are currently suing the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, to end the deliberate fluoridation of water in the United States. Our two guests from the Fluoride Action Network, Dr. Paul Connett, who holds a PhD in chemistry and specializes in environmental toxicology, and his son, Michael Connett, who is an attorney at law. Michael is a member of the American Association for Justice, Public Justice, and in addition to his toxic tort practice, Michael has extensive background and expertise in the area of fluoride toxicology and has filed several administrative petitions on behalf of various consumer, environmental, and medical health organizations. Now, Michael Connett is also with the Fluoride Action Network and is currently heading up a lawsuit against the EPA that could end water fluoridation as we know it. This is very exciting. Mr. Connett, welcome to Newsbud. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to talking.
Now, this is a major case, one that I'm very interested in. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about Fluoride Action Network, the team you guys have there, where the funding comes from, and the overall goals of your organization?
Yeah, well, we started Fluoride Action Network about 18 years ago in 2000. And the idea of it was to broaden public awareness about the health effects of fluoride exposure and to bring integrity to the discussion of this issue. So we have been working to educate the public and policymakers about what the science shows about the risks and about the way fluoride actually affects the teeth. And because we used to believe, or it was believed back in the 1940s and 1950s, when they started fluoridating drinking water, that you needed to swallow fluoride. And that's the way you got the main benefit. But today, we now know that the main predominant benefit, whatever it is, of fluoride, comes from the topical contact with the teeth. So there's really no compelling need anymore to be swallowing fluoride, and that's where you get the risks.
We are not for profit and science-based. We don't get involved with the conspiracy stuff. It's just what the science says. And trying to expose the fallacies of the government agencies and the dental lobby that keep claiming that fluoridation is safe and effective when in fact it is neither.
So in our view, the United States really needs to be following the lead of Western Europe, which has ended, for the most part, fluoridation of water, but still allows people to use fluoride in dental products and individual use products. And that's the way we should be going here in the United States. And the Fluoride Action Network has been trying to bring awareness to that fact and move us in that direction.
Now, your organization I've been familiar with for some time, and you guys have been doing some great work. And right now you are taking on a major opponent, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, in court. The Fluoride Action Network is currently suing the EPA. Now, can you tell us a little bit about what this lawsuit is about?
Yes. Well, let me give you a little bit of history first of all. Back in 1986, the EPA established an absolutely ridiculous safe drinking water standard for fluoride, 4 parts per million. That's nearly 3 times what every other country in the world and what the World Health Organization recommends for a safe level in drinking water. Mexico, Canada, and most of the rest of the world, it's 1.5 parts per million. So this 4 parts per million, it suggests that something was very fishy in 1986 when that was set, and it was. We've since learned that it was politically determined by various entities that didn't want to pay a lot of money to remove fluoride down to a lower level. But that's a detail. My son, who worked with the Fluoride Action Network for several years, in fact, he was the one that produced our wonderful health database and had many of the Chinese studies translated from Chinese to English, so they were available to a Western audience. He came up with the idea of a petition under TSCA. TSCA is the Toxic Substances and Control Act, avoiding the Safe Drinking Water Act. If he had approached the EPA or sued the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act, SWDA, it would have immediately gone back into the hands of the Water Division, which, as we experienced, had dragged its feet for 11, 12 years on doing anything. Even when the NRC, which they paid for a study, said, there's a problem here and you should do something about it. This was useless. So obviously these people are in the hands of, or let me put it a simple way, they are subservient to the much larger agency called the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. And the National Institutes of Health have had a policy pro-fluoridation since 1950. 1950 was when the Public Health Service in the United States endorsed water fluoridation. Incidentally, an extraordinary endorsement, because in 1950, they were only halfway through the trials. They had no evidence, really significant evidence on effectiveness, and they certainly didn't have any evidence of health effects. The only thing that they admitted then, and many in the dental lobby only admit it now, that the only harm that fluoridation causes is dental fluorosis, a mottling, discoloration of the enamel. Okay, so he didn't want to go that route because it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They would have dragged their feet, they would have ignored everything. But under TSCA, any citizen can sue or petition to have the EPA ban a substance which was damaging to health, which was presented an unreasonable risk to health. So Michael put a petition together, very, very well documented with over 200 studies. We wish he delivered hard copies to the EPA, petitioning for the EPA to stop the deliberate addition of fluoride to the drinking water because it posed an unreasonable threat to health. And the unreasonable threat is effects on the brain. The lowering of IQ in children is the issue that we focused in on. There are many other tissues that we think are harmed by fluoride, the thyroid gland, bones, the kidney, and so on. But no, we focused in on the tissue for which there was most evidence. In fact, there's over 300 studies which indicate that fluoride damages the brain in animals, biochemical, behavioral studies, 52 studies now that it lowers IQ in children. Let's be scientifically correct here. There is an association between high exposure to fluoride and not so high. Fluoride exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ in children. And studies which have come from China, from India, from Iran, and from Mexico. We put all those studies together and presented them. The EPA had 90 days to respond to that petition. And after 90 days, they said, no, it essentially doesn't cause any harm. These studies are not adequate, or they're weak, or whatever. They just dismissed the petition. However, they did us a favor. They didn't dismiss it on jurisdictional grounds. What we thought they were going to do is to say, we are not the agencies you should come to. You should go to the Water Division of the EPA, which would have put it right back into the court of the people that have shown in my view, no scientific integrity whatsoever. They didn't do that. They didn't claim jurisdiction issues. They said they rejected it on the substance of our petition. And that allowed us to then go to court and sue them and have this issue adjudicated by a federal judge.
Right now it's the battle of your life, it seems like at this point. You're taking on a major opponent, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which one would assume would have the full support and backing of the federal government on any type of issue, especially a legal one.
The EPA, most of its work on fluoride historically has been done through the Office of Drinking Water. And that's the agency that we've primarily communicated with and dealt with in the past. But the Office of Drinking Water has really failed to take protective, timely action on fluoride. And the key example here is that in 2006, the National Research Council, which is part of the National Academies of Science, produced an extensive report which concluded that the current safe drinking water for fluoride is unsafe and needs to be lowered. That was 12 years ago. And yet the EPA's Office of Drinking Water has still not lowered the safe drinking water standard for fluoride. So they're not taking action. They're dragging their feet. And so TSCA provided an opportunity to have the issue addressed by a different section of the EPA, a section that really hasn't dealt with fluoride before. So we liked having a different sort of audience, if you will. But there was another component to TSCA that was very attractive, and it remains very attractive to us, which is that TSCA, the statute, which is Toxic Substances Control Act, provides that when you challenge the EPA in federal court, which we're now doing, you are entitled to what's called a de novo proceeding. Now, that's a bit of legal jargon, but it's a very important phrase and concept, because what it means is when you challenge the EPA, the court, typically when you challenge a federal agency in court, you are dealing with what's called the arbitrary and capricious standard, where the court is only going to overrule the agency if the agency acted just completely irrationally, like 1 + 1 = 3, something that is so clear cut that anyone looking at the record could see it. But normally, when you're challenging EPA and you're dealing with questions of scientific, judgment, things like that, the courts are extremely deferential and they just let the EPA make whatever decision it wants to make. Here, a de novo proceeding means that the federal court does not give deference to the EPA's judgment. The federal court is going to look at the evidence anew, independently, and make up its own determination as to what the facts are without deference to the agency. And not only that, but as we got a very significant ruling in February of this year, confirming that we're not just limited to the information in the administrative record. We can get discovery against the EPA. We can request certain documents. We can depose their experts.
Incredible. We'd have just what we've wanted for years, an independent person, a qualified person, reviewing our science, their science, and we've never had a judge and jury before. I mean, the whole issue of fluoridation, you're not against science, you're against power. The other side has the power. The other side uses public relations techniques and lots of money to persuade the media and persuade the public that there's not a problem, that fluoridation is safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective. And they produce a whole bunch of organizations that endorse fluoridation, etc., but not good science.
This is going to be a true trial where we're going to have our experts taking the stand and testifying. The EPA is going to have its experts taking the stand and testifying. We're going to get documents, internal documents. We don't know what they are, but we'll see, and we'll be able to bring that evidence to bear. So it's going to be a unique, and unprecedented opportunity to really have the evidence heard by an independent umpire, if you will. And so we are looking forward to that. And this is something that, for once, will get this issue out of the monopoly, if you will, of the federal health agencies, which have been dragging their feet for a long time and have been so invested in the fluoridation policy that they've really performed the role of cheerleader versus umpire. They really, the federal health agencies, I think, really have acted to seeing their role as promoting fluoridation versus soberly assessing the new science to see if it really is safe, if it really is effective, and if it really is a wise idea for us as a nation to be doing this.
2 big victories already. And now my son is in the process of getting the best experts that we can find and can afford to present our case to convince the judge. And if we're successful for that, and I do strongly believe that the science is in our favor, and I'll explain why I believe that in just a moment, it will be the end of fluoridation. If you see the amount of science that we have, a reasonable judge is going to rule in our favor. I'm not sure yet whether we're going to have a judge and jury or just a judge. So this is very exciting. And I explain why we're particularly excited at this moment. And incidentally, you can see all of this on our webpage, fluoridealert.org. This webpage, the revolving mastheads, of which there are 10, cover our lawsuit, so it's very easy to find, and also cover what I'm about to talk to you about, a very important study that came out in September of last year, September the 19th, 2017. And why I remember that date so easily is that we had just had our annual fan conference in Washington, D.C., and it was the day after our conference. We were still in the hotel waiting to come home when this came across the wires that this study that I'm about to tell you about was published in Environmental Health Perspectives, which is one of the leading environmental health journals in the world. What was the study? The study was funded. Let me give you the funders, because this is incredibly important. The funders of this study, this multi-million-dollar study, was the National Institute of Health. Remember, they are pro-fluoridation, have promoted it ever since 1950 by one of more of their agencies. 2, the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which for me is one of the best scientific agencies in the US government. And thirdly, the Environmental Protection Agency. So the very agency that we are suing actually paid for a study which shows that we are right, vindicated our position. And I'll explain why it vindicated our position. This study, as I said, was 12 years. It was done by a team that between them have over 50 studies, cognitive effects of children relating to environmental pollutants, lead, mercury, and so on. So the people that did this research had the credentials. They're the world's leading experts in this kind of study. That is also very important. They came from very prestigious institutions, the University of Toronto, the Mount Sinai medical people, Harvard, Michigan, Indiana, and University of Mexico. And the study was done in actual Mexico. But most of the research is American and Canadian. And what they looked at was 300 mother-child pairs. They looked at the mothers during pregnancy and measured how much fluoride exposure that they were getting. And the measurement was fluoride in the urine. And that was important because there are many sources of fluoride, and fluoride in the urine picks up all those sources. So it doesn't tell you whether it's from water or from toothpaste or from food or whatever. It just tells you how much fluoride the mother is being exposed to during pregnancy. Wow, that's a good start. And then they measured the IQ of these children, at the offspring, at 4 and between 6 and 12. And they found a very strong correlation between exposure to fluoride in utero during pregnancy and the IQ, a loss of IQ in those children. And here it gets even more important and striking, because the exposure levels, as measured in this study in Mexico, are virtually the same as adults are exposed, including pregnant women, are exposed to in the United States. So the current exposure levels to fluoride in the United States, based on this study, would predict a loss of, on average, 6 IQ points in the population. Now that is incredibly significant, because a drop of 6 IQ points would halve the number of very bright children in society, the number of geniuses in your society. These are the children with an IQ above 130, and would have increased by about 50% the number of children who are mentally handicapped, mentally challenged. That's an IQ less than 70. So you could imagine the social and economic ramifications of doing that to a whole population. And that, incidentally, is one of the problems of this ridiculous practice of fluoridation, because if you put a medicine or a treatment in the water, it goes to everybody. It goes to your whole population. Your whole population is being exposed to this toxic substance. And if you expose the whole population, you can predict up front that that some people in the population are going to be sensitive to that fluoride. They're going to be at one end of the normal distribution curve. They are going to be hurt. They are going to experience side effects. That's totally predictable. It's totally scientific to say that. Some people will be hurt. The only question is how many and to what extent.
When you essentially medicate an entire population through the water supply, it's not really very controlled, is it? The dosage, I mean, how do you control the dosages?
You can't. It's the most clumsy thing we've ever done in medicine. You know, that people, promoters of fluoridation, just love to quote the Center of Disease Control as saying that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. It is one of the top 10 most misguided public health policies, the most fraudulent public health practice. It's a massive deception of the public. That's what it is. And you're right. It is. I'm surprised that any doctor subscribes to fluoridation for these reasons. You're right. Once you put a medicine in the drinking water, you can't control the dose. No. Every pharmacist knows you have to tell what dose, or the patients what dose to take. There's no control over dose. There's no control because you can't control how much water people drink. You can control the concentration most of the time, but because you're controlling the concentration at the public waterworks, you're not controlling the dose. But people are not only getting, some people drink a lot of water, and in addition, you're getting fluoride from toothpaste and some food, and tea, pesticides, so on. Secondly, you can't control who it goes to. It goes to sick people. It goes to people with poor nutrition. It goes to people with other medical complaints. This may make it worse. Some people have poor kidney function, and the kidney gets rid of about 50% of the fluoride you take in each day. Those people with poor kidney function can't do that, so they are impacted more than the average person. And then some people have low iodine impact. So if fluoride impacts the thyroid gland, this would make that condition far worse with low iodine. So, yeah, and then thirdly, another reason it's a lousy medical practice is because you are violating the individual's right to informed consent. I mean, this is in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You can't do this. You can't force medicine on people. And it's a major plank in modern medical ethics. Every doctor in the United States and around the world should know that if before you give medicine to somebody, before you treat them in some medical way, you have to get their consent. You have to tell them what it's good for, what it could help with, and you have to tell them what the side effects are, what the downside is. And then the patient should make up their own decision. And if they violate that, they could lose their license, really. There's only a few exceptions to that. Like if somebody is mentally incapacitated, then the doctor may have to act without their consent, or even then they should get a guardian's consent. So it's extraordinary to me that doctors have stood by and allowed their dental colleagues to push this foolish practice on the whole population without stepping in and saying, wait a moment, you shouldn't be doing that. You haven't got informed consent. So basically what it comes down to is that when a community fluoridates, whether it's a town, a state, or a country, you're doing to everyone what an individual doctor can do to no one. And that is ridiculous, but it's been going on for 70 years. And the problem is, for us, they have the power. We're talking about government health agencies. We're talking about local health boards. We're talking about the WIC program. We're talking about state health boards, state health departments. We're talking about the federal government, the Center of Disease Control. These all promote it. It's safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, like a broken gramophone record.
Fluoridation today in the United States is a dogma. It's a medical dogma. And medical dogmas die hard. They don't just go away. You really have to work to really change the paradigm. And, when you're dealing with, many people in the dental profession have spent their careers promoting fluoridation. And it's not easy to change your mind, when you've invested so much of your professional work promoting something. So that is a barrier. That's one of the stumbling blocks that we face. Now, I always point to the Western European, experience. There were countries in Europe like Germany, part of Switzerland, part of Finland, Netherlands that were fluoridating their water supplies, but have stopped. So it's possible we can do it. The United States, unfortunately, has been the most enthusiastic and active proponent of fluoridation. So this is sort of the home of the beast, if you will, and so that does make it more difficult.
And then the second plank of the stranglehold is that the major media have put this off their radar, that they won't touch it. That we had a response from, I think, one of the top science editors of the New York Times a few years ago, saying this issue was resolved 50 years ago. I mean, somebody who says that a scientific issue has been resolved is not a scientist. I mean, they don't know about science.
It's a situation where outside voices, in this case, the federal court system, are important. People who don't have a dog in the fight, people who can come to the issue anew without some of the baggage. And that's what we're really going to need to really move this issue forward and get away from some of the quagmire that we've been in for years.
No, Aldous Huxley said this. He says the tragedy of science is that a beautiful theory can always be overthrown by a single ugly fact. And there are many, many ugly facts now in the literature which should overthrow fluoridation. But hitherto, we haven't had that judge and jury to see that we've had the science. Meanwhile, the mass of people in the United States is walking around totally oblivious. Usually they don't even know they're drinking fluoridated water. And one of the things that we're doing now is to warn pregnant mothers not to drink fluoridated water based upon this study. Now, we got to do this carefully. We don't want to panic people. We don't want to be accused of scaremongering. When you do an epidemiological study, you get a correlation. We have a strong correlation between the levels of fluoride that mothers are exposed to in pregnancy and a lowered IQ in their offspring. Correlation is not cause and effect. Nobody has yet proved that a mother exposed to fluoride is definitely going to have a lowered IQ child. It looks like that based upon this correlation. So, but really, this is when the precautionary principle should kick in. If in doubt, leave it out. Don't take chances, especially when they're alternative. It's unnecessary. Fluoridation is unnecessary. If you want fluoride, you can get fluoride tablets. If you want to apply it topically, you can use fluoridated toothpaste, and that gives people the right to choose, which is removed with water fluoridation. So you're not depriving anyone of fluoride by getting the EPA to forbid the deliberate addition of fluoride to the drinking water.
Now, you mentioned those who may have a dog in the fight. You briefly mentioned the dental associations. Who are some of the major supporters of water fluoridation, and how much influence do they have?
Well, historically, one of the biggest proponents of fluoridation has been the American Dental Association, the ADA. The ADA does not have a good track record when it comes to toxic substances. The ADA is the same organization that has been promoting the use of of mercury amalgams. People might think of them as silver fillings, but those silver fillings are comprised of 50% mercury. The ADA has been promoting the use of these mercury-laden silver fillings since the mid-19th century. That's over 160 years. And if you just stop and think, why on earth would anybody ever knowingly put mercury in their mouths for their life? And that's what the ADA has pushed on the mercury front. So the ADA, which has been a very strong, vigorous proponent of fluoridation, I think has demonstrated a lack of cautiousness when it comes to how we treat toxic substances, including fluoride. So they've been a big proponent. Unfortunately, the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, has also been a very vigorous proponent of fluoridation in the United States. Really, the full alphabet soup of health organizations in the United States have promoted fluoridation. It's one of those situations where if you ask an organization like the American Medical Association, well, what is your evidence for why fluoridation is safe and effective and should continue? And they'll, well, go and ask the CDC for that. And you go to the CDC. So it's when you actually ask these organizations for the evidence, they have a tendency to point to someone else who they believe has it, but you never quite get to the actual evidence. It's a sort of a confidence game where everyone is confident that the evidence exists, but if you actually go and look for it, it's very hard to find.
It certainly is exciting. Some big steps that your organization is making successfully at this point to end this practice that has been going on for so long. Now, you have mentioned certain studies. You have spoken in detail about some of the potential hazards, for example, especially geared towards the young, whether they're infants or children, and how that's attributed to lower IQs. But what are some of the other potential effects of water fluoridation, and how does it affect, let's say, an adult, for example?
Good question. Well, one thing we can say without not sticking our necks out, and that there's no way that they can rebut this. Fluoride causes a condition called dental fluorosis, a mottling of the teeth, and that's how they discovered that they thought that fluoride might reduce dental caries. No question. But they thought in 1945, the father of fluoridation, H. Trenley Dean of the US Public Health Service, thought that at 1 part per million, you could reduce tooth decay, and only about 10% of the population would get this condition of dental fluorosis, and only in its very mild or the mildest levels that they hardly notice it. Parents wouldn't notice it. Only dentists who studied it would notice it. 10%. Run the clock forward to the present time, and now approximately 60% of children aged 12 to 15, 60% of children aged 12 to 15 now have this condition, and not just in its very mild form, but quite a number in its mild form, and many in moderate and severe. And with moderate and severe dental fluorosis, 100% of the enamel is impacted, and it is known to actually increase dental decay. So teeth, it damages teeth. By the same token, it damages the bone, and this is not in question. Millions and millions of people in India and China and other parts of the world with high natural levels of fluoride have a condition called skeletal fluorosis. And at its worst, it's crippling. People are just bent over. The whole backbone is fused by the fluoride. Now, we don't see many cases of severe crippling dental skeletal fluorosis in the United States. But what we do see a lot of is the first symptoms of skeletal fluorosis, which is just like arthritis. It's a stiffening of the joints, pains in the joints, pains in the bones. And millions of people have arthritis in the United States. Huge problem. And incidentally, none of these government agencies in fluoridated countries have ever sought to see if there's a relationship between how much fluoride you're exposed to and this people having arthritis. Never done that. It's the most obvious thing to do. Haven't done it. There's evidence that fluoride damages the kidney. There's evidence that fluoride lowers thyroid function. In fact, doctors in the 40s, 50s, and 60s in France, Germany, and Argentina would give fluoride tablets to people with hyperthyroidism, overactive thyroid, to lower the activity of the thyroid gland at doses which are comparable to what people are getting in our society. Join the dots. We have millions of people in the United States and in other fluoridated countries with hypothyroidism, underactive thyroid gland. And again, you can see, just as with arthritis, you see how politics is interfering with science, because there's been no attempt in America and in Australia and in New Zealand and other fluoridated countries. Most countries don't fluoridate their water, by the way, only a handful, mainly English speaking. They haven't attempted to see if the rate, prevalence of hypothyroidism could be related to how much fluoride people have been exposed to. They don't look. And I say that's politics. If you don't look, you don't find. It allows them to continue to say things like, we don't see any evidence. Well, you're not going to see any evidence if you don't look. The absence of study is not the same as the absence of harm. See, I think that they're working backwards. The promoters of fluoridation, it's like a religious crusade. They believe that fluoridation works. They believe that the only harm is dental fluorosis. They believe it's safe and effective. And they believe that their reputations would be damaged if they stop fluoridation or admit that this was a terrible mistake. And so they work backwards. Any study that comes forward that shows harm is a junk study, according to them. Any scientist that speaks out against fluoridation is a quack. It's crazy. It's flat earth. And not a pleasant thing for an academic, by the way, to be accused of being crazy, flat earth society. So you can see the politics, they work backwards. As I say, they work backwards. They are now protecting this practice. They're more concerned about protecting this practice and their reputations than they are about protecting the health of the people. We don't have the media to help us. We don't have the health agencies you think would be helping us. We don't have the professional bodies doing much research on this. So our big hope then is to get this into court and to get people that are not trapped by the paradigm promoted by the health agencies and the professional bodies, and who are going to make an independent judgment. And that's all we've ever wanted. As an organization, we're science-based, and we believe that if the science is given a fair trial, we will win.
Well, it's certainly, as I stated before, very exciting that this opportunity is actually presenting itself, and it sounds like your organization is going to actually get your day in court to make this happen. And I have a couple more questions for you, Dr. Conant, before.
Yeah, actually, sorry to interrupt. We've actually had 2 days in court, and we won both of them. Yeah, but the big one comes later. The big one comes later with our experts.
That's right. That's something that I'm personally very excited about. We here at Newsbud are very excited about it. Can you explain to us what is the process of fluoridation? Who exactly is adding it, and where are they getting this substance from? What is it?
Oh, that's when it gets really hairy. Where we're getting the substance from. Fluoride is added to the drinking water as a compound. We're not adding fluorine, the element. We're adding a compound that contains fluoride, like sodium fluoride, or generates fluoride when it dissolves in water. And the substances which is used most often is a substance called hexafluorosilicic acid. Horrible name, but the formula is easier to understand. H2, remember H2O, H2Si, symbol for silicon. F6, that's 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of silicon, and 6 atoms of fluorine. The fluorine atoms surround the silicon, and there's 2 hydrogens added in there. Hexa, meaning 6, hexafluorosilicic acid, H2SiF6. Where does this come from? It doesn't exist in nature. It is a waste product of the phosphate fertilizer industry. Let me be very precise about this. When you make soluble phosphate from phosphate rock, so they dig up the phosphate rock in places like Florida, Louisiana, phosphate, it's insoluble in water, no good as a fertilizer. You've got to solubilize it. And the way they do that is to add concentrated sulfuric acid to the raw rock. Now, what that does is the sulfuric acid reacts with the fluoride. There's calcium fluoride. Fluorspar is a common contaminant of any soil product. And that generates a substance called hydrogen fluoride, very toxic. And then the hydrogen fluoride reacts with the sand, silica, to form silicon tetrafluoride. And these are gases, so they come out of the process and they land on the surrounding land. And it cripples cattle that eat the grass. It damages the vegetation. It damages the citrus crops in Florida and elsewhere. Eventually, the EPA was forced to add requirements. They had to put scrubbers in. And these scrubbers are very simple. It's a spray of water. A spray of water converts these 2 gases, hydrogen fluoride and tetrafluoride, into a substance called hexafluorosilicic acid. And it's this scrubbing liquor, the water plus these gases, which builds up to about a 23% solution. And they take that solution, put it into tanker trucks, send it to intermediary chemistry plants, and then send it to the public water people. So, and now, this is very bizarre. It gets worse. They can't dump this scrubbing liquor into the sea by international law. You can't do it. You can't use the infinite dilution of the sea, virtually infinite dilution, to dispose of this stuff. They can't dump it locally because it's far too concentrated. So they've got to find a source of water which would dilute this 23% solution, 23 parts per 100, down to 1 part per million. That's a dilution of about 180,000. You need 180,000 gallons of water to dilute this concentrated hexafluorosilicic acid solution down to a 1 part per million solution. Where are you going to get that quantity of water? Answer, the public water supply. Now, another vagary, another one which makes this bizarre. The EPA has a regulation on hazardous waste, and it's a reasonable regulation, but not in this context. They say if a chemical industry can use a toxic waste as a starting material in making another chemical, hooray, this is great. This is recycling of hazardous waste. Instead of treating the hazardous waste, you recycle it back to other products. But this is the loophole they use. The moment the public works buy this substance, this hexafluorosilicic acid, it's no longer a hazardous waste, it's a product. And it's on that basis that are allowed to put it into the drinking water. And I'll tell you a funny story about this. Johnson City in New York State, they stopped fluoridation. And shortly afterwards, a memo went round, and it said, we have to get rid of our stockpiles of hexafluorosilicic, barrels of it, because in a certain amount of days, it's going to revert to being a hazardous waste. And then it's going to cost us an arm and a leg to get rid of it. And there was another community recently that continued to fluoridate its water until they used up their stockpile. So even when they declare that it's dangerous, they allow that danger. As I said, the whole thing is bizarre. But right now, this is almost a red herring because, it's not a red herring in terms of the stupidity of the practice. But in terms of our lawsuit, in terms of our evidence, the evidence is based upon the effects of pure fluoride. The people that are doing these studies, they're looking at fluoride or natural fluoride, not this concoction. And that's where, so what I like to say is, hey, fluoride, pure fluoride, pharmaceutical grade fluoride is bad. Hexafluorosilicic acid is even worse. But we have the evidence that natural fluoride is bad.
We learned with leaded gasoline a number of important lessons from our experiment with leaded gasoline. And that is, one, it can take decades before something which is very toxic, like lead is certainly very toxic, before we have the sort of convincing medical evidence to convince the skeptics. So it's a process that can take a long time. And we also learned from the leaded gasoline debacle, if you will, we learned is that when you're adding and dispersing a neurotoxin en masse, throughout the millions and millions of people, that can have severe, unintended, and complex consequences. With lead, it caused increases in violent behavior, reduction in IQ, a whole sequence of behavioral problems. And really the brunt of that was borne out by the disadvantaged populations with less adequate nutrition and other factors. So with fluoride, it's the importance of a precautionary approach to toxic chemicals, particularly chemicals like fluoride that are linked to neurotoxicity. If you wait for absolute, unequivocal proof that will convince even the most diehard proponents of fluoridation, what you're doing is you are waiting until the bodies are in the street, if you will, and you're waiting for the big oops moment when it will be too late for many, many people. So I really think today in the United States, we really need to, I think it's the wise approach with fluoride is to go the route of Europe and to remove it from the mass water supply and to put it in individual products like toothpaste where every individual and family can make their own mind up. They can make their own decision. Do we want to use fluoride or not? And they can limit their ingestion of it. That I don't think is going to result in any increase in tooth decay, but it will protect us against potentially serious health outcomes. So I think we know enough today to know that fluoridation is an unreasonable risk because we don't need to swallow the fluoride. The risks come from swallowing, and we have studies linking risks with fluoride at low levels. So I think the time for protective action is now, and hopefully the federal court will agree with us and will force EPA to take that protective action, which it has dragged its feet in taking for many years.
Dr. Conant, we have covered some of the legal aspect of it about the lawsuit. We have covered some of the health impacts and the process of water fluoridation. Are there any environmental impacts that are attributed to water fluoridation? Just fluoridating the water in general, does that have any impact on the environment that you're aware of?
I think that the most concern is the waste fluoride. Once the fluoride has gone through the whole system, it's going to end up in the sewage treatment plants. And there's no processes that I'm aware of that remove the fluoride from the sewage. And therefore, it's going to flow back into streams and lakes. And again, when you've got a still body of water, this is one of the reasons that Ithaca, New York, did not fluoridate its water, because its outflow goes into Lake Cayuga. So you've got a fairly not readily flowing stream diluting to the sea. And so the concern here is on the aquatic food chain. Maybe this very like the impact of certain insects, flies, certain flies that are part of the fish eat the flies and so on. There is some concern there, but the major concern is on human health. And there's one, this can get complicated. This issue can get complicated when you get into the science of how fluoride works and so on. But there's a bit of common sense here. When my wife first persuaded me to get involved in 1996, she gave me some literature to read. She wanted me to tell her whether she should oppose fluoridation at the village level. And one of the things I read, which I found so striking, was how low the level of fluoride was in mother's milk. Now, let me put that in perspective. The level of fluoride in mother's milk is a reflection of millions of years of human evolution, from animals all the way up to human beings. So this is what nature has deemed to be the level of fluoride that an infant, a newborn baby, needs for healthy growth. So when you find that the levels are extremely low, it suggests that nature has a reason for keeping fluoride away from the baby. In fact, mother's milk is protecting the baby from fluoride, and certainly suggests that it's not needed. It's not needed for teeth. It's not needed to swallow it. In fact, today the proponents agree that the major benefit is topical. It's on the surface of the teeth. Okay. So in fact, now let me give you the numbers. The average level in the mother's milk is about 0.004 parts per million. And we now fluoridate at 0.7. That's the recommended level. 0.7 is 175 times higher than 0.004. So when you bottle feed a baby using fluoridated tap water, you're giving your baby 175 times more than the baby would get if it was breastfed, and nearly 200 times higher than what nature believes is safe for the baby. So again, common sense says mother's milk protects the baby from fluoride. Fluoridated water, fluoridation, removes that protection. So our task today is to make sure that pregnant mothers get this information. Hopefully you can help here. Pregnant women should not expose themselves to fluoride. Just remove as much of their exposure to fluoride as they possibly can. And secondly, we have to inform mothers and parents not to use fluoridated tap water to make up formula. But here you run into a rub, because families on low income cannot afford bottled water for this large thing. And so the very people that you're trying to help, the people on low income, because tooth decay, about 80% of tooth decay in the United States is focused in on about 20% of the population. And that 20% of the population are children from low income families. And we definitely want to help those children. But they can't afford to avoid it. They can't afford the reverse osmosis, etc., that rich people can, or even middle-income people can. And secondly, the low-income children are the last children that need their IQ lowered. They're already compromised in a number of ways. Often poor people live in the most polluted parts of town, the parts of town where they're most exposed to lead and other pollutants. Because they have low income, they often don't get the best schooling and so on. So there's so many strikes against a child from a low income family. And to lower their IQ further is a tragedy, and an unnecessary tragedy.
Now, Mr. Connett, your father spoke very highly of your knowledge and expertise on fluoride. If you could just share with some of our viewers, what are some of the steps that you take in your daily routine to minimize any exposure to fluoride?
For my drinking water at home, which is for most people will be the biggest source of fluoride, the water, especially if you're an adult. For young children, if you're a 2, 3, 4-year-old child, toothpaste can actually be the biggest source of exposure. But for an adult, drinking water is often going to be your biggest source. And so I get a non-fluoride or a non-fluoridated source of water. Actually, it's a RO system where some minerals are added back in. I get that actually from a store down the road, which is great. And I have 5-gallon glass jugs. Glass is the best medium, I think, to drink water from, because you know you're not going to be dealing with any issues with plastic or anything like that. So that's what I do. I get non-fluoridated water at home, and that's my main way of reducing fluoride exposure. I don't personally use fluoride toothpaste. I do think fluoride toothpaste, for those who want fluoride, is a much more sensible and wise approach to using fluoride, because you're putting it on the one part of the body, your teeth, that stand to benefit, and you're minimizing the ingestion. Now, the exception there, which is important, is that young children, and if you're a parent out there and you have a young child, young children have a very poorly developed swallowing reflex. So most of the toothpaste that they put in their mouths, they're going to swallow. And so we don't have low fluoride alternatives for toothpaste in the United States. Every fluoride toothpaste is adult strength. So if you have a young child and they're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, you one should be very mindful of making sure they don't put much toothpaste on the brush, and 2, supervise them and teach them how to spit it out. Because that is a very important source of the fluoride for many children in this country.
Well, the best way to avoid fluoride is to ban fluoridation. So put your effort into political efforts to get fluoride out of the water, number one. And especially to avoid it in these vulnerable periods like infancy and during fetal development. Reverse osmosis is, you can get tabletop reverse osmosis. You can also distill the water. But with both of these approaches, you're removing everything. You're getting pure water, but you're not getting the minerals that you need to use for your diet. So if you do use these approaches, you want to also supplement your diet with calcium, magnesium, and so on. And any health store will be able to give you tablets which would supplement that. Or you add a few drops of these things. Another system which is cheaper, and I've never used it myself, it's bone char. Bone char. They use it on a large scale in India to remove fluoride. Fluoride is attracted to the bone, so bone char is a good way of removing it. And I have people that swear by this. My wife and I, drive 20 miles to a spring and get this beautiful spring water. We've been using it now for several years. We're very, very happy. So check to see where your nearest spring is, and then drive over and fill up your tanks with good water.
and a few other sources that I think your viewers should be aware of that are sort of hidden sources of fluoride, if you will. Wine made in the United States, unfortunately, particularly white wines. Not every white wine, but a lot of white wines use a fluoride pesticide called cryolite, and that can result in concentrations of fluoride that exceed the levels that we add to water for fluoridation. So that can be an important source and a hidden source of fluoride. And likewise grape juice. If you have children, and it's a lot of kids, drink white grape juice, or white grape juice will be a component of other juices. That can lead to high levels of fluoride because the grape juice also will have the fluoride pesticide residue. Another source of fluoride, unfortunately, is tea products. So if you drink tea, if you love tea, my suggestion for you is get the white tea is the best source of tea. The fluoride content of tea is directly proportional to the age of the tea leaf. The older the tea plant, the more fluoride will have accumulated. And also, the less antioxidants will be in the tea leaf. So the older tea leaves have less antioxidants, which is the good stuff, and more of the fluoride, which is the bad stuff. If you love tea, go for maybe the white tea varieties are probably the healthiest when it comes to fluoride exposure. And there's other sources which I'm happy to talk about, but it probably would go on too long.
If you don't want fluoride in your water, you have to go to great lengths and often quite considerable expense to avoid the fluoride. If, on the other hand, you don't have fluoride in the water, your expense is minimal. Either fluoride tablets are minimal, or fluoridated toothpaste, which most people are using anyway, and that's why our kids are being overexposed to fluoride based upon the dental fluorosis levels. Towards the second half of this year, we are going to promote even more heavily the methods that they're using in Europe to reduce tooth decay without forcing fluoride on the whole population. The two programs we're very interested. One is the Nexo program in Denmark, which is a program that starts at about 18 months, where it's house visits. They have dental clinicians who are taught to show young children how to brush their teeth properly. Very simple program. And they monitor the program. And even though Denmark has got the lowest dental decay rates in the world, the communities that are doing this, their dental rates are now about 1/5 of the rest of Denmark. So this is extremely successful, very simple. And of course, the other advantage is when you have access to parents, which you get when you go to visit their home, then you can fight that the biggest problem of tooth decay in children is baby bottle tooth decay for children that use these sippy bottles, baby bottles. They suck on juice, fruit juice, or sugared water, or even Coca-Cola, heaven help us, for hours on end. It's used as a pacifier, particularly low-income families. And the end result is the top teeth, the milk teeth, are rotted to the gums. And you can tell baby bottle tooth decay. And that leads to extractions under anesthesia, which for young children is very traumatic, and for the society as a whole is very expensive. And so one of the reasons that these programs in Scotland and Denmark are very cost effective is that with access to the parents, you can reduce the prevalence of baby bottle tooth decay. The other thing is, in Scotland, they also emphasize giving both the children at kindergarten, the first time they go to school, they teach them how to brush their teeth, and they give them good diet, and they educate the parents on good brushing and on good diet. And the end result of this is you're not only fighting tooth decay, you're also fighting obesity and all the ailments which come with the obesity. So this holistic approach to health, where you get in early with diet and of course exercise is another issue, and better dental hygiene. And so many other diseases accrue from dental disease. And I think we agree with the promoters on that. You've got to look after dental disease. There's no argument about that. But the difference between the pros and the antis as far as fluoridation is concerned, we believe in getting to the root cause of the problem, which is poor diet and poor dental habits. And they believe in giving kids poison, fluoride.
Well, we are definitely very excited about the current lawsuit that is going on against the EPA from your organization, the Fluoride Action Network. What can people do to support this lawsuit and your organization?
Well, if they go to our website, that's the thing. Educate themselves. That's the first thing. Educate yourself. Educate your friends. Many people don't know very little of what I've said with you today, and I appreciate you getting this message out further. But if they go to our website, fluoridealert.org, make sure you spell fluoride right. Many people get it wrong. They spell it F-L-O-U. It's F-L-U-O-R-I-D-E. Think of flu.
Yes, that's our website, the Fluoride Action Network, fluoridealert.org. Now, the ADA, unfortunately, purchased fluoridealert.com. So they are actively trying to divert people going to our website. A lot of people go to our website, they go to fluoridealert.com, and you will be sent to the ADA website. The ADA did that about a year after we started our site back in 2000. So they have diverted a lot of our, people trying to get to our website to their website.
If they go to our website, we have 10 revolving mastheads, and they deal with the lawsuit and they deal with the health effects I've talked about, particularly the IQ. It goes into detail on the Bashash study, the 2017 study, financed by the US government, 12-year study. And the other 41 IQ studies goes into details. And also it gives our fundraiser.
We're going to be retaining a number of experts. And unfortunately, experts charge a lot of money. As I've learned with my toxic tort practice, experts are expensive. And so we really, in order to have the tools to take the EPA on toe-to-toe and to give this judge the best possible evidence, we need to raise the funds to pay for our experts. And that's expensive. So we thankfully have a great opportunity right now in that two very generous donors have agreed to match dollar for dollar every dollar we raise until May 31st, up to $75,000. So if we raise $75,000 by May 31st, we will have raised $225,000, which is going to take us through to the end of this trial and give us we will have all the resources and tools to make the best possible case that can be made. So if you support this effort, please do consider donating to the effort, which you can do if you go to our website, fluoridealert.org. And we would certainly appreciate it. And again, it's up until May 31st, every dollar donated will be tripled.
We've got a number of scientists that know a lot about fluoride, but unfortunately, they have declared in public that they're against fluoridation. It makes it rather easy for the other side to say that they're biased. I don't think they're biased. I think they're doing the natural thing. If you read the literature, there's no reason why you should be for fluoridation. However, we know how that's going to be used in court. So what we are looking for is good neuroscientists, people who do studies on the brain who have not committed to fluoridation. And therefore, they will then have to read the literature on fluoride. So when the judge asks them questions or their lawyers ask them questions, they're giving the answers based upon their expertise in neurotoxicity, with the new evidence on fluoride coming through to make a judgment, how this compares with lead and mercury and arsenic and the other known neurotoxins.
Well, I'd like to thank Michael Connett very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you're an extremely busy person. I've been trying to get you locked down for a better part of over a month now, but we finally made it happen. You guys are doing great work over there at the Fluoride Action Network. Fluoridealert.org is the website. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Paul Connett, for being our guest today. You're a senior advisor at the Fluoride Action Network, and I will be sure to leave a link in the show notes to your site. We're going to be keeping a close eye on this throughout the course of the lawsuit. Now, and best of luck with this lawsuit, because this would be a historic victory that I don't think people really grasp how massive this issue is. It affects literally everyone in the country at this point, except for a very small portion who are aware of the potential dangers that fluoride poses and take the necessary steps to limit their own exposure. So again, thank you very much, Mr. Connett, for your time today.
Thank you, Spiro, and I look forward to speaking further as we move along in the case.
Thank you, Spiro. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Connett.